Here's my contact information if you're interested. One of the big things that I've tried to do moving on to the services manager role is to kind of not eliminate, but try to get data into the right place with regard to email addresses. John at DASI gets to me, gets to my phone, but more importantly, services at DASI Solutions gets to my entire team and is tracked through the help desk system now, right? Tech support at DASI will get you your tech support email, and that's meant to be kind of an on-demand service where the services are meant to be kind of a scheduled activity, scoping a project, and along those lines. So I wanted to address, well, pretty much what most of my day is talking about file management, where people are putting their files these days. Some of the ins and outs of local file storage, some of the ins and outs of file management within SolidWorks and reference management in general. Some of the advantages of network storage, the disadvantages of network storage. Have some chats about Pdm workgroup, although to be perfectly honest, I'm going to keep that fairly short, being that it's got a scheduled kill date of 2018 at this point. So I really can't suggest going into workgroup at this point. Pdm standard, some of its capabilities, limitations, and then on to Pdm professional. And I could briefly talk about Pdm manage as well if you haven't heard about that. It's on the way for 2018 from a company called RevZone, but not technically part of my PowerPoint here. So some of the basics on file management within SolidWorks. I kind of wrote down some benefits and downsides of local file management. I think like the best thing about local file is the fact that you're utilizing the actual workstation that's at your fingertips, right? Because one of the nasty things that I'll talk about with regard to network storage is I've had a lot of customers beef up their computer and then save onto a network drive and then complain that it's still slow. I'm like, well, you're not using your computer for that, right? You're still stuffing data through a tiny hole over the internet. So, you know, the idea behind local files is you're getting that speed of a hard drive, especially solid state drives are really fast these days. So, you know, if you're not saving to that solid state drive, you're at the mercy of the network in that regard. You know, and generally working local is going to be faster. And as a whole, I think working with local files is very easy to do, right? You know, data's in your hard drive and your folder locations. Huge downsides to working locally. You're not sharing files with the rest of the organization. And when you do, you're probably breaking file references, right? So if you're going to copy that data off your local someplace else, you're potentially running into some issues, naming conventions, things like that. Then you end up with multiple copies of this thing floating around, which is even more dangerous. If you run a search on your network drive, you'll probably find 5 of the same part number out there and hope that the latest version is the most modified one recently. Right? Which, of course, brings to the other downside, which is management of the revision side of things, right? Pretty much outside of any Pdm system is what I would consider to be a manual revision control scenario, right? Where you're right-clicking on the rev block in SolidWorks, it's going to rev the drawing file itself, and then get it down on the print. Staggers me how many companies I talk to don't even bother with rev control. It's just the latest one out there all the time. Guess it's not a bad thing, but I hope you don't ever get audited by any systems. Any backups are a manual process in a local file environment, and more commonly, not done at all. I've talked to a lot of customers with one data set of this thing on their C drive over the years, and you know, hope that thing doesn't stop spinning anytime soon, because you definitely have that backup someplace. As a whole, I don't think working locally collaborates with the rest of the business. Aside from just sharing of the CAD data, no one else can see this file. You know, purchasing needs a PDF of this thing. They're pestering the engineer trying to get a copy of that file all the time, right? And then in a multi-user environment, standard part libraries become very difficult to deal with in a localized environment. Some of these things are taken care of by working on a network storage scenario, right? I put quotes around shares of the data with the rest of the organization because there's a lot to network storage in that regard. Not all people have access to the network storage drives, right? Some of the other benefits, though, are that generally speaking, the network storage is going to be backed up by an IT professional of the organization. At least one hopes, anyways. And trying to get that all, you know, backed up. You know, getting a backup from them might be kind of difficult. Depends on where it's stored, tape backups, things like that. Are they in that day, right? And then standard part libraries become a lot more easy to manage, right? You got a standard part library on a network drive, everybody's pointing to that. Most common one is probably Toolbox. Anybody run Toolbox on a network? Anybody run Toolbox locally? Having problems with that yet? If you're the only user, it'll be all right. You start to get more than one person involved in the Toolbox on a local drive, and you're definitely going to get a lot of different screws and descriptions on screws and things like that. So, downsides in network storage. By far and away, biggest downside, you're at the mercy of the network speed, right? So there are about 10,000 more things that complicate file save when you start storing on a network, right? When you're locally and you hit file save, you say, take what's in RAM, spin up the hard drive, write it to this location, right? It goes through the motherboard, writes the data to the drive. When you go out to a network, this thing's going through the NIC card, through a network cable, through many switches in some cases, right, over to the server drives where it's hopefully writing and retrieving that data back and forth out of the network. So, as a result, at the very least, your speed's reduced compared to just writing to your local hard drive, especially if you got a solid state. And more common than not, I'm seeing a lot of people call up with failed to save errors. Almost exclusively, when I get a tech support ticket that says I have a failed to save error, where are you saving? On a network drive. Always. Right? Is this a solve this problem? I don't know. Potentially, it's very difficult to diagnose why failed to save errors occur on a network drive. The best thing I can tell you, and when it does occur, is try to save as to start with, right? Which kind of goes against this multiple file idea, but it's better than not saving at all. And I've also had some success toggling through configurations on an assembly and then trying to save again. Not 100% sure why that happens, but sometimes you can get it to save even though. When you have to do the save as, now we've got some file referencing issues to deal with. I'll speak to that. Another big issue I see on the network storage situation is overwritten files out on the network drives. Somebody will do some work. What I see a lot is a combination of these two things, right? Where somebody will grab a copy of it, they don't want to deal with this slowness of the network, so they copy it down to their local drive and get that back. Meanwhile, user B did the same thing, and we now are both making changes to a file. The last person to put it up on the network wins, right? And now you've got overwritten file data. No real history of what happened there, so by the time you print this thing off and get it out to the shop floor, you don't know what happened. I've seen countless situations where pack and go misses references off a network drive as well. Right? If I'm going to try to send that off to a customer, vendor downstream, hit file pack and go and it grabs 80% of the assembly and misses a bunch of files. There's numerous reasons for that. I can't find the references, didn't access that area of the hard drive. It's gotten better over the years, I think, but I still find pack and go a little stressful on a network drive in that respect. And then I've seen a lot of file reference issues when you combine that with working locally. So people will try to get around the lag of the network, copy the data local, make changes. Now you're going to push this thing back up to the network. Are you overwriting what's there? Did you move this thing a couple of times? Did any file names change when this occurred? Right? In which case you're breaking references moving back and forth across. So something to put in perspective, I want to make sure everybody clearly understands is that the file reference header is where all the data is stored in the SOLIDWORKS assembly for where all those parts are. If the last save on the network drive was, F, drive whatever, then written into the SOLIDWORKS assembly is F drive in that folder location downstream. When you drag that assembly locally, it's looking for data out on the F drive still. Okay? If you move all those assemblies with it, it's still looking for data out of the F drive until you tell it to point to the localized data set. So one of the major reasons I see people break references a lot is that they'll rename or move files, right, without taking into account that file reference header that the assembly's storing. Both Pdm Workgroup and the additional Pdm product, Standard Pro and On to Manage, handle file references differently in that regard. So speaking to Workgroup, briefly as I mentioned, Pdm starts to get into a world where you've got kind of the best of both worlds, right? It's locally caching the data while still communicating with that on the network and attempting to keep a one-point file system with respect to that. So it's sharing data with the rest of the organization. You can back up, automated backups and things, standard libraries. Pdm Workgroup had some revision control, although if anybody's You've probably been fairly frustrated by every checking bumping the rev, even though that wasn't what you were intending to do. There was a working local copy with a plus sign that you could pull off, but as a whole, a lot of people would hold that data locally until they were ready to release it again, which to me is not really the point, right? We want to be saving and sharing any changes with the network, but at the same time, I don't want to necessarily bump rev, which was kind of a limitation of workgroup. But it does eliminate overwritten data, right? Because you took ownership of that file, and it locked out that file in the workgroup vault, so no other user could get access to it, right? Some of the downsides, file-based searching, which slowed with growth of the vault, right? So what's going on in workgroup is there's this text file-based search that's doing in the background that knows where all this data is. As part of that, it's rewriting file reference headers and move data around, which in and of itself is a good thing, but relied on Windows indexing. But the larger a workgroup vault you got, the slower this thing took, because you had tons and tons of text files that you need to look through all these PDM files in the backbone. As such, my recommendation over the years has been 10 users and under, 200 gigs and under. And I have, probably 50 to 60% of my customers is violating one of those two things, right? And are calling with performance problems in workgroup for that reason. I've got one I just acquired on the west side of the country that has multiple different divisions, military defense company, and they have over 8 workgroup vaults at 30, 40 people apiece at 2 terabytes a pop in various locations. And I'm now getting into talks to migrate that data into PDM with them. And it's going to be a long and hard conversation because of the next point down here, which probably most importantly is PDM workgroup is being discontinued in 2018. So to be very clear about that, if you have data in the workgroup vault, it's not going to quit working on January 1st, 2018, right? They're just not supporting an upgrade to 18. There is no data set going into 2018. There are no changes being made to that software. It will not be on the DVD for the 2018 release. To my understanding, 2018 data will not be able to store in workgroup. So if you're choosing to stay with workgroup for the time being, you're choosing to stay on 2017 software and back. I'm handling most of the conversations to talk about moving to PDM Standard. So PDM Standard, PDM Pro, their functionality is similar in nature to workgroup, although what I would consider to be a much more robust backbone. So you can share all kinds of data with the rest of the organization. Where workgroup didn't really do a great job of multi-file types, PDM Standard and Pro can handle just about any file type that you want. We've got some limitations on other people's CAD softwares as far as managing references. There's some add-ins for Pro-E and things like that. But for the most part, it's designed to manage SOLIDWORKS data and SOLIDWORKS references. And then you can bring in PDFs, spreadsheets, whatever you're looking for as far as contributing data relative to that. The backups are very easy to do inside of the PDM environment. You basically need a copy of the archive. You need a backup of the database relative to that. Standard parts libraries become very easy to manage, and not only can you get them up on the network, you can share changes to them very quickly across the organization to get latest functionality. The way it functions is a version and a revision control. So revision control is handled through a workflow. So as you choose to release data in the workflow, you're telling it when to rev stamp, what to rev stamp. You can do alphanumeric, and have various different revision schemes within PDM. But every time you check in a change, it versions the file. So where this is a huge benefit, I think, to the end user is it's a rudimentary backup in and of itself, right? If I check in 4 times a day, then every 3-4 hours, I've got a backup of that file. I can go back to it if anything goes wrong, right? If I have a customer comes back to me and says, hey, we changed it to this, I need to back up and go back to this deeper pocket on the part. I've got a version of that file, whether it was rev stamped or not, in the history of the file. Not to mention, if you put a comment on every one of these things, you're going to get a running history of every single change that you've made to a file as well. The workflows are very robust inside of a PDM environment. You can do pretty much anything you want to do. I've seen companies function with 2-state, 3-state workflows. I was at a customer with 40 workflows earlier today, right? Every single different piece of the organization goes into a different workflow and is managed accordingly. Notifications are firing all over the 400 different users across the vault, right? We can even handle multiple site replications and things with this. So overnight, we can basically ship the entire archive to another location so that other users are picking that data set up live when they get in the morning. I've got replicated sites going out to multiple different countries that are now doing true 24-hour turnaround on this stuff. So they're going to replicate over to India, and then India's picking it up and detailing it, checking that data back in, and the American engineers come back to detail work in the morning and keep rolling forward. The whole backbone of the PDM standard and Pro functionalities are built in SQL. So PDM standard is built on SQL Express, which is a free version of SQL. A purchase of PDM Pro gets you to see the SQL standard, which is from Microsoft Direct, ships with our PDM products, and has no theoretical RAM cap. The biggest issue that I'm finding with SQL Express is it's got a 10 gigabyte RAM cap on the DB, which is really not a problem. Some of my largest customers don't have 10 gigabyte databases. The biggest limitation is it has a 1 gig RAM cap, and that's straight from Microsoft. So if you have a database larger than a gig, then it's going to cache what it can, and then it has to uncache information to be able to load other information into the RAM of the server. So again here, it's really meant, PDM standard is really meant to be a replacement for workroom. 10 users in the vault connecting at any given time is probably a pretty good recommendation for it. I'm not so hard pressed on the 200 gigs worth of data. The archive size doesn't really matter that much, but storing database information on the back end is really important. And where the SQL really becomes important is in what's considered metadata searching. So probably the biggest advantage in my mind when you go into a PDM environment, yeah, you're working locally because it's caching the files, and you're kind of getting the best of both worlds relative to local file management versus network storage. But the biggest advantage to me is the searchability, right? So either locally or on your network storage drive, how are you finding data right now? You're either going to browse to the folder where you last remembered it was, hopefully nobody moved it, or you're going to run a Windows search and you go to lunch or something because they take forever, right? So Windows searching takes a long time because it's going through every file on that drive looking for that file name. It rolls into every folder looking for that data, unless you set up Windows indexing, in which case it goes and looks at this large index file. The way PDM functions is it's looking for given information in this SQL database. So based on a search, it's running a query in an SQL table and saying, hey, I know that this file is called this, and it returns a quick value that says it's right here on the hard drive relative to the database search, right? So instead of looking through all these big heavy CAD files, it's looking through a database for the information, and then there's another table that just simply says where it is over on the server, right? The other side of things that are really important there is you can search for much, much more than just file name. I talk a lot to customers about what's called a data card in PDM. The data card represents all the custom property information on SOLIDWORKS files. You can store additional information there if you want, but a really good place to start in a PDM environment is anything that's on your title block or your bill of materials should be on your data card, right? That way, as we fill that information out, it fills out the SQL database, it fills out PDM bonds downstream, it fills out title blocks downstream, okay? And then probably most importantly, you can search for that later, right? I can jump into any vault, show me all the aluminum files, show me all the aluminum files that have a description of bracket insert, right? And it really makes file nomenclature not so important anymore. And it really allows for that part number scheme to take over. Because one of the biggest challenges I found, especially larger companies, is really the part number, right? I'll walk into tons of meetings and companies talk to me about, well, how should we part number everything? I'm like, it's not my decision to make, man, I'm sorry. At the end of the day, there's 1,000 different ways to do it. None of them are right. Some of them might work better for your organization than others, but at the end of the day, how you number your parts just needs to be uniform so that everybody understands what they're looking at. When I look at that situation, I'm really more interested in what do you want in your metadata properties, right? We can search for part number if you know that, right? But I have my own guitar company, and I couldn't tell you what the part numbers are on 20 parts on my guitar, man. I really can't. I don't think in terms of part numbers. That said, purchasing has to order part numbers, right? So that information needs to be at their fingertips too. So storing both bits of that information becomes vitally important, I think, downstream with respect to that. Last thing on the overall software functionalities to be understood, I suppose, is PDM standard is included in your SOLIDWORKS professional licensing. As I mentioned, it's a direct replacement for Workgroup, and it's meant to handle what Workgroup handled, right? So it's an attempt to handle basically one workflow, which is actually more than I think Workgroup did. It's meant to handle SOLIDWORKS files in general, although you can add additional file types to it. And there's a lack of automation tools in PDM standard. So you can't tie into API. There's no automatic transitions based on condition sets, things like that. But it's a very adequate tool to replace Workgroup in almost every respect that I've ran into at this point. The one big kind of pushback that I think corporate saw from PDM standard was that it was not capable of saving a PDF off during the release process. And if you dug really hard into Workgroup, there was a way to do that in Workgroup. So everybody's complaining that didn't happen. I did hear some rumblings, and I'm not 100% sure this is happening, but 2018 was supposed to include PDF save and PDM standard, which is the one thing that everybody has said they wanted, but it didn't do. The only other big thing that I see that's a limitation standard is that being built on SQL Express, it just has kind of a cap to how many users you can throw at it, and you cannot install standard on SQL standard. You can't do it on your own licensing. It only functions in SQL Express. So a need to upgrade to Pro just for that alone, once you get upwards 15, 20 users in a Vault, is probably a really good idea from a performance standpoint. But Pdm Pro opens up API, as many workflows as you want, as many variables as you want downstream, things like that. So here's some of the breakdowns there. Care to see them. This has been as a direct replacement to Workgroup. Each seat of SOLIDWORKS Pro is equal to one CAD editor license inside of a standard environment. The Workgroup and contributor and viewer licenses convert over free of charge. I recently went through this at another company. They had bought 6 or 7 contributors and a 5-pack of viewers. We filed some paperwork with corporate, and they become PDM standard functionality moving forward. It's built on SQL Express. And then probably most importantly, it has a direct upgrade path to Pdm Pro. So if you choose to go from standard to Pro, I basically have to back up a database, run the software upgrade, restore the DB onto SQL Pro, and then I'm just moving out all the clients to a professional level license. That is not the conversation going from Workgroup to Pdm Pro. Workgroup has to get extracted, and it's called cryptic at best. We can have that talk if you have any Workgroup vaults, but that's a lot of different things you need to go through. Show some of the overall features here, which I talked about: workflow, users, groups, permissions, version and revision control. But as I mentioned down here, it's built on SQL Express, one workflow. It's only got 2 ref scheme capability, no API, no automated tasks, and no template capabilities. Which, of course, in Pdm Pro, all those move into feature level. So I put a little star next to replication. That concept gets a little more complicated when it comes to 2017. They're now offering database replication as well as archive replication. Archive replication is pretty straightforward. That's your CAD data copied to 2 locations for use. Database replication is more performance and high latency WAN environments. The companies that are looking at DB replication are global companies, typically speaking. But if you have any high latency in the States, we can have that chat as well. And one of the other big things that a lot of companies are interested in is the web server capabilities. This allows you to set up an IIS control so that people that don't necessarily have PDM installed but have a username and password can access that data from any device, right? I will say this: you can access the data, you can view the data. I don't know how much more you're going to do with it in Web 2, to be perfectly honest. It doesn't necessarily have full-blown capabilities, but I think that's kind of to be expected out of a thin client over the internet to a certain degree. There's a reason the software has an install to it. I'd like to see some additional web capabilities come in the future, because right now, absolutely everything PDM is Windows software-based at this point. So Android and Apple devices don't play nice with Vault, right? You can access them on web, so on web server client level. So Any questions with all that?
For a replication question?
Sure.
Replicating obviously to another company that you've got, can you replicate only part of the database, or do you have to do the entire database?
So, with respect to the question, I think you're more interested in replicating the archive files, the CAD data itself, right? And the answer to that would be yes. You can choose in the replication schema what folders pull over and what folders do not. More often than not in that scenario, if you're looking to limit their data usage, on the admin side of PDM Pro, you're just saying their group, and you're listing all the users in that group, they can only see this folder worth of data, and you set the replication scheme to only push that data over. And they don't even see empty folders on their end that you don't want them to.
Okay.
So, yeah, visibility, read-write permissions, things like that are all handled through the user group level permissions. But you do want to be careful not to replicate the data down there, because even if it's read-only, they can still copy it out of the vault if they can see it, right? So I would recommend not replicating over there if you don't want them to have that data set, right? And that's also what I've done to get ITAR compliancy at companies as well, because there's certain data sets at ITAR that you can't send to other people, right? So, any other questions with all that?
One more question. User levels, is there viewer users, is there editing users and things like that in professional?
There is, yeah. Both PDM Standard and PDM Pro come with 3 license types. There is CAD Editor, Contributor, and Viewer. A CAD Editor is basically got full capabilities involved, right? You can edit, add the workflows, things like that. And above and beyond Contributor has an add-in to SOLIDWORKS that I'll bring up on the screen and show here shortly. That basically allows you to do all the check-in, check-out, and movement through a workflow right inside SOLIDWORKS, so you don't have to leave the interface. A contributor would more be for somebody who's adding spreadsheets, spec sheets, bill of materials, ECRs, things like that, that needs write access to files within the vault. And then the viewer pack is purely that, you're viewing files. They're sold in 5-packs. And I've fairly recently learned, about a year and a half ago, found out that a viewer can change state on a file. So most of the documentation I read said that they can only view, but it turns out they can actually move a file to the workflow as well. So you just can't check out and modify a file if you have a viewer license. Another thing that's kind of nice is in live in the admin tool, you can switch license type. So if you have X amount of contributors, you can swap the contributor to a viewer back and forth live in the interface. And then they're all floating licenses, similar to the way SOLIDWORKS network license works, right? So it's all about concurrent user. So a lot of companies will buy a 5-pack of viewers that might serve 15, 20 people, depending on how often they need to get in the vault to see files. Right? We typically see a pretty, you're 1-to-1 on CAD Editor, usually. I'd say somewhere around 3-to-1 on contributor, depending on workload. And then I've seen up to like 5-to-1 on viewers, something along those lines relative. But all goes on the SNL and activates the SOLIDWORKS network licensing as well. So beyond that, I wanted to just kind of cover some of the basics of file management, some of the things that are breaking in your file reference trees, things like that. I'm not 100% sure the level of everybody's use in the room, but I wanted to show some cool tips that I've found over the years for file management. I was going to take all that data, throw it into a Pdm Vault, so you can kind of see some of the backbone of how it works inside of the Pdm environment. My laptop functions as a Pdm server as well as a client. So.
You ever heard of, is it copy tree?
Sure.
Is that better than just leave it stay there?
It is, and I'll cover that. I think copy tree is one of the better functionalities in PDM. They have a copy tree and they have something called move tree. A move tree is designed to particularly take an entire job and move it someplace else, right? And that sounds really simple, except if that job's in 17 different folders, right? Because going and grabbing the assembly and the sub-assembly is all the drawings over here, standard parts over here. What move tree does is it gathers all those references and says, hey, they're all supposed to be over here in this project now. Copy tree does the exact same thing, of course, except it's not moving the data, it's copying the data over. What's really useful about copy tree, though, is similar to a pack and go, you can do a find and replace so that you can swap, say, job number off the front of a lot of those references and then skip anything that's in a standard parts folder, So one of the big things that I always really recommend to customers, especially about a standard parts conversation, is to try to get those into a standard parts location that everybody uses. You have no idea how many customers I run into that have standard parts in every job folder, right? And at that point, you really don't have a standard part as far as SOLIDWORKS is concerned, right? Because one of the things I'll show you in the PDM environment is a where used functionality. And if you're referencing, say, the same bearing over and over again on that copy tree idea, and not copying the bearing from job to job, you'll actually see hey, this bearing's used on 15 different machines. If we were swapping out that bearing from a purchasing standpoint, we now know how many files and how many machines that's impacting downstream. If you've got a copy of that bearing in every job, it's used everywhere once, right? So there really is nowhere used if you're copying it around. And copy tree is really useful for that. I refer to it as kind of a similar but different job. You know, we're going to build another machine or another design that looks like that one, but of course, we're changing it, right? Because nobody ever builds the same thing twice. At least it's pretty rare anyways, right? But a lot of things are similar but different, especially in the machine automation business from what I've seen. So
I think we had problems with configurations.
Configurations is an interesting topic in and of itself, and I think an easily 1 hour presentation alone on that wouldn't cover everything that is configurations. Briefly speaking to that, I don't necessarily believe that there's a great solution out there for configurations with regard to data management. I can show you what PDM is capable of. Where I think it falls short is when you start to get into configurations that are changing the form, fit, function of a part, right? In my mind, if it's a different length, size, width, with or without holes, and it gets a new part number, it should probably be a new part, right? Especially from a PDM data management standpoint, because that part file is going to go through a workflow. It's going to get released at a certain time, and it becomes very difficult to manage releasing one configuration and not another, right? I've seen some hybrids where companies will have a configured part file, but then a drawing that references each configuration. And now they're releasing the individual drawings so they can kind of tackle that animal that way. Interesting animal. It's definitely got its benefits, I suppose. The one downside is you've kind of put all your eggs in one basket there, right? You've now got this heavily configured part that's referenced by 100 drawings or something. At this point in the game, most configurations that I recommend are a necessity for movement at an assembly level, right? I need the cylinder up, cylinder down, stroke in, out, right? And I only say that I recommend those because there's no other way to get those onto a drawing view. But I'm pushing hard on corporate to fix that problem because I'd really, really like to see assembly movement without the need for configurations. Because as I'm sure you're all aware, configurations add a lot of bloat to an assembly, right? Especially if you've got big 3 data in it when you started. You know, if there's a 1/4 gig big 3 file in there already, and then you add 5 configurations to show it go up and down, this assembly size bloats, right? And there is some settings that can help with size of a file, but I do like to make clear you're only moving the overall problem around, right? When you look at configuration load and unload and purging of configuration data, all you're really doing when you purge configuration information is you're saying, you know, leave it in the part file, but rebuild it the next time that you swap configurations, right? In which case, instead of storing it in the part file, you're waiting for it every time you swap configs, right? So that setting didn't fix anything. It just moved it over here instead of waiting for it all at once, right? But I can show you what PDM does relative to configs, but like I said, rev control and the release of a product is best done as an individual file if it's a form fit function difference with respect to that. So one of the first things I wanted to show is really basic, won't take very long, but I just want to make sure that everybody in the room understands the raw fundamental of it, which is the actual file header side of things in the backbone. So I've got a data set inside of this folder here that is just the U-join out of essentials. And I'll grab that overall assembly. It opens up all that data set, finds all these references, and everything is fine. Right? What I want to point out is that under File Find References, it will list exactly where on the hard drive it's looking for each one of these files and what it's called. Right? And it's important to note that because a lot of users I talk to don't even realize that this list exists to begin with, right? And it's a really important list to understand relative to this, right? And this kind of goes back to the conversation of all your standard parts in your job directory, right? If all this is pointing to the same folder, you don't really have any standard parts going on here, right? It's copied everything there. You should see standard parts going out to a standard parts directory, you know, on whatever parts are applicable, and then only the job-specific files with respect to these references here. Closing that assembly off and closing out of SOLIDWORKS, and I guess one thing to understand from a RAM perspective is that assembly is still loaded in RAM. And I want to make sure everybody's aware of that as well, right? SOLIDWORKS purposely holds on to that assembly in RAM so that the next time you want to open one of these files, the next time you open that assembly, it's going to open faster. The downside of that is it's stuck in RAM. So if you try to rename it or move it right now, you're going to run into problems, right? This is emphasized even more on a network drive location because if anybody has that thing open on a network drive, it's not going to want to rename because it's in use by Windows somewhere, right? So whenever you're doing any renaming or moving of data sets relative to a SOLIDWORKS file, close SOLIDWORKS in between. If you're not already, I'd highly recommend closing SOLIDWORKS at least once a day. Say when you go to lunch, close it, reopen it after lunch. I've talked to countless users that tell me, yeah, I crash around 3 o'clock every day. It's because you ran out of RAM, right? SOLIDWORKS built RAM all day long, right? And around 3 o'clock, you filled it up and it started running sluggish. So if you can get through a 4-hour day of all the data sets you're working on and close in between lunch, you can avoid a lot of those problems. And it's real easy to watch that. You just look at the task manager. Under performance, it'll show you the CPU usage as well as memory. Looks a little bit different in Windows 7, but what you're really looking for is how high you're spiking your overall RAM, right? And you want to stay away from, you know, the upper echelon of that. More RAM won't necessarily make your computer faster unless you're maxing out RAM, right? So I'm going to go make the critical simple mistake, right? I'm going to go rename this bracket to, I don't know, new bracket, right? So this is what this needed to be called now because purchasing didn't like the name of it or whatever, and somebody goes in on a network drive or otherwise and renames that thing, and it's now caused downstream problems in SOLIDWORKS, right? So like I said, it's pretty easy and very common issue that I've seen. You go to reopen this data, it pops up and you get this error message, right? It says that it can't find this file. What do you want to do about that? If you're not getting this error message, it's probably because you checked that don't show me again box, right? All right. I'll show you where to turn that back on because without it, you're going to have a hard time finding your files that it disappears on, right? In newer versions of SOLIDWORKS, I believe this came in 16, they started doing an open summary, and it actually tells you, and you can actually view a report of the files it could not find, right? What it was able to, you know, locate relative to the data sets and what the problem with that was. More often than not, it's going to not find the data set. And it then suppresses that file in the feature tree over here. If you try to unsuppress that data and it still can't find it on the hard drive, it's going to prompt you to browse for that file again, right? So this is a way if you have that option turned off to be able to go and get the data. And if you browse out, and now I know it's called new bracket, of course I can point back to that. It'll try to load the new data set, and provided that that was just a rename, right, you should have no errors downstream. If that was a save as or another bracket completely, you're asking for some made error problems downstream there, right? And as a whole, if you're going to make a similar but different as a replacement, save as is really important there, right? Because if you just make a new bracket from scratch, even if it's the exact same dimensions, it's a new bracket, right? It got new header, it got a new numerator in the background on every line and every edge on that file, right? So every mate's going to blow up downstream relative to that. And they're doing what they can with that. I've seen some progress over the last couple of releases, and future into 18 to be able to swap and find new edges and references is getting better. But as a whole, doing a save as is really important there. So speaking to that, another really simple but important thing I want to clarify is the difference between save as copy and continue, and save as copy and open. right? As you go to do a save as on something, so particularly, I'll go grab this bracket again. If I go to do save as, a very important dialog box that no one ever reads pops up, right? And it clearly states exactly what these functionalities do, but I see countless users break references anyways, right? So the save as is changing out the file references on all open documents. So one really fast way I've successfully swapped out a standard part before, right? If you're in PDM, you do a where used, you find this bearing is used in 5 assemblies. Go open up those 5 assemblies, and if you do a save as to the new bearing that you want it to be and change some numbers, you're swapping 5 references downstream, right? The flip side of that coin is if you did a save as and you didn't mean to swap references, you're breaking old jobs, right? So there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's what are you trying to get done, right? The lower two are much safer, right? Save as copy and continue and save as copy and open will not affect any open references in SolidWorks right now. So doing these, the only real difference between continue and open is what's open in RAM afterwards, right? And they added this save as copy and open a couple of releases ago. In earlier versions of SolidWorks, it was just save as copy, and then you had the new one at your fingertips, right? Or you didn't have the new one at your fingertips. You had the new one saved in the hard drive someplace. You had the old one at your fingertips. And then people would go swap that. Change the wrong part, and then it backs, right? Now you're doing a replace or something downstream, right? So, save as copy and open kind of helps with that, right? It's saving the copy of the bracket, opening that one in RAM for changes. One thing to be careful of when I do a save as copy, and I'll do my favorite thing I see on the network, my new bracket, right? I'll do a save as copy and open. It swaps out the loaded file in RAM here with the new bracket, right? So if I made some changes to this thing, let's say I changed the diameter of the hole or something, close and save that. New bracket's still open in RAM, right? So they look identical except for that change that I just made, right? So save as copy and open doesn't swap the file in RAM. It just also opens the new one. So be a little careful with that. And in that case, this is now referencing just my new bracket relative to that, right? If I wanted it to reference the new bracket, and I didn't really handle that on the way in, you can do it during a file open. So one other thing I like to point out from a really simple file referencing standpoint, almost everybody I talk to just double-click smashes through opening a file, right? And you're missing out on a lot of options when you do that, right? When you double-click and open a file through the open dialog box, you're telling the software to open that fully resolved with every reference that it last had, right? Alternatively, if you just left-click select it, you get a ton of options in the interface as you go to open. You can open lightweight, large assembly, large design review mode. You can open specific display states or specific configurations. And then more to my point, you can click on this references button and actually point it out to what you're looking for. So I can see it's looking for the new bracket here. If I simply double click and say, no, I want to reference this other bracket, you'll notice the file name updates in green. And as I go to say okay, and I open, it's going to be referencing the new design relative to that, which I don't know if I made the hole big enough to see past the crank. But there's the larger hole relative to that. And I'm referencing the new file bracket here. So when I save, it commits that to the hard drive or the file header on the assembly. Important to note that last part. Just because I said open the new bracket right now, if I do not save this assembly, it's pointing at old bracket next time, right? The save operation is what actually writes that to the file header. Sure. Mm-hmm. So if I had to take a guess, not seeing any data sets or button clicks there, I would venture a guess that there's some external references going on in some of the files that they're packing going, right? And even if you pack and go over to a new job directory, there's some potential for those external references modifying original files, right? They've made some enhancements to that.
You did a pack and go, you opened it, and
The old stuff, yeah. And honestly, in my 10 years, I think I've seen it go back and forth on that a couple of times, right? So I'm very cautious with pack and go with respect to that. After you do a pack and go, open the assembly up, go to File, Find References, see where it's pointing, make sure that it's pointing in the right locations. I'm a big fan of SolidWorks. It's not a perfect software, right? So, sure. Right. Yeah, if you're not in a PDM environment, I highly recommend using Windows or SolidWorks Explorer, right? And that was kind of the backbone for Workgroup as well, and it piggybacked on that. And it's got some great functionality, right? If you do the SolidWorks rename there, the SolidWorks pack and go, or the SolidWorks move, what it's doing is it's rewriting the file reference headers without the need to open this assembly, right? So really good point to bring up. I'll go ahead and close that off, close out of SolidWorks again, release some files from RAM. Sure. Yep. So you can get to this SolidWorks folder pack and go. This is launching the functionality for pack and go through Windows Explorer, or through SolidWorks Explorer here. You can get to the pack and go from here. You should see 4 more options here. You should see a SolidWorks move and a SolidWorks rename as well. I may have gutted parts of my install for Explorer. I don't find the need for SolidWorks Explorer so much once you have a PDM standard or Pro Vault, because it's handling all the file references inside of the vault. Right. So this is definitely a good solution in the meantime. And notice that when you pack and go from here, it's fire in the pack and go. But it's trying to look for reference information relative to the file explorer, the folder, the SolidWorks Explorer in the background. I suspect with 17, though, I've probably taken Explorer off, which is why I don't have those. Probably need to turn them back on. But one thing to note inside of here, right, is this select and replace functionality here, which is really, really important. Because down here, the add prefix and suffix, this is how you get the new bracket, right? Because that's all it's going to do is append more text to it, right? So in the real world, what you probably have is some kind of job number that makes this thing unique, right? So select and replace will do a really nice job of that, right? So if I'm looking for the word new and I want to replace that with 123 or something, right? And you can do a replace all on any file that you find, right? So here it found new bracket. You'll notice in green it replaced new with 123, right? So the idea there is that if you've got job number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're trying to make a new unique job set, you do that select replace, grab the old number, key in a new number, and it'll spit out all new part files for you in a new directory. And then of course the new directory location is going to be set down here that you can browse out to. Alternatively, you can save off to a zip file as well from here. And then flatten the data to a single folder. Important to note there, otherwise it tries to keep the hierarchy of the subfolders and extracted the data. I find especially saving off to a zip that flattening it to a single folder is a lot easier to do. But you may want to clear that box if you're just going apples for apples between new jobs, right, relative on your network. So. It's possible. So the best thing I would recommend to you is if the way you're doing it is not causing this problem, make a video of it and tell them to do it that way, right? Because I don't know what they're doing, you don't know what they're doing, right? But if you know that your way is not breaking files, record it and make that the standard, man. There's a lot of different ways to do it. They may not be renaming some of the data or something. Check their service pack too relative to yours. It's possible that the service pack's a problem, depending on what version of SolidWorks you're in there. So, one other basic SolidWorks function I wanted to make sure everybody knew was not quite as far as a pack and go, but just an individual detail. I talk to a lot of users that are looking to make similar but different part, right? So they'll open up the part and do a save as copy there on the part file. And you're actually doing yourself a disservice if this thing's already been detailed, right? because now you're going to go through and you're going to make another drawing of this thing from scratch. You're much better off opening the drawing file up and doing your save as from there, and I'll show you why. If I open up a particular drawing and I want a similar but different bracket, part, whatever it may be, it'll load that and load the reference, right? So in this case, it's idler arm is the name of the drawing. Idler arm is the part file it's referencing. When you go to do the save as operation, if you check this box down here for include all reference components, you can add a prefix or a suffix. I don't know if they fixed it, but I noticed a bug on this a little while ago. If you just added prefix and hit save, it didn't really do it. I don't know if they fixed it. I haven't really tried it. But more often than not, I'm just going to advanced and telling it what I want the files to be called, right? So that just basically brings up the save as reference dialog box, in which case you can hold control and select as many files as you want relative to this. And then you can do a find replace here, or you can add a prefix or suffix relative to that, right? So breaking my own rules here, I'll put new in there and then hit apply, and that adds new to the front file of that file, right? That could be a job number. I could do a find replace with a different part number, whatever you want there. And notice that both file types are doing green, right? So when I hit save to this, and it's going to just save to the same folder location, I'm not only saving off the new similar but different part, I'm saving off its drawing as well, right? So now when I go to make changes to that, SOLIDWORKS, it will save off the new drawings. Let's see if it actually got through that. Hey, I got the files. So, that 17 again. Tell them I've seen this error before. And that'll open up and now reference the new idler arm part, right? So if I open up this particular part file, it's referencing the new part relative in the background, right? And that's a really good way to avoid, damaging, references on old machines, old jobs, and things like that, right? So, and I admittedly did it the wrong way for a long time. I went save as on part for a long time and then found myself redetailing things all the time, right? Which probably should have found a way a little earlier on. I started my life as a detailer and kind of did myself a disservice there. So that's some of the basics of SOLIDWORKS file referencing. I think I got somewhere around 10 minutes left, so I'll show you some of the PDM side of things as well. Like I said, I don't really have workgroup installed, as 17 is going to be its last release. So taking a look at the Pdm Vault side of things, if you haven't seen it, one thing I'll show you here is that the Blueberry, and I have multiple different vaults for various customers that doing migrations and things on. You can have more than one vault on a machine if you want to. Although as an end user, I really don't think you want to. For the most part, all your data should be in one vault, all the database stored references there. Our PDM products, both PDM Standard and Pro, have the same interface, and they look pretty much identical to Windows, right? It's got additional right clicks and options inside of here. But one of the main goals of SOLIDWORKS PDM is to reduce the learning curve to something that an end user already knows, right? So if I want to make a new folder, I just right click and make a new folder. If I want to drag and drop data sets in, I can take that and do just that. So if I were to go grab all this, I can drag drop, I can right click copy, paste. And what's happening right now is it's adding all this data to my local vault view. This finish add operation with the bar you're seeing on the screen right now is communicating with the database, letting it know that 10, 15 files just got added to the vault, right? They're currently checked out by me. It knows their size, their state in the vault, the last date modified, the computer name that they're checked out on. And then I can just right click and check in that data, which is taking a copy off of my local drive and putting it out on the server archive storage location, which of course is just another spinning disk inside of my laptop here, and then checks in all that data relative to the archive. So that alone just shared the data with the rest of the organization based on workflow and permissions, right? I've copied it to my local drive, I've checked it into the vault, and now I've got that data set relative. So down here, you get full eDrawings professional preview inside of Windows, so people without SOLIDWORKS can spin around your 3D CAD model without having to open it, without having to preview anything. It's just right in this preview window. Any given sub-assembly, full assemblies down here, drawings will pan, zoom. We can preview 40 different file types, I think, inside of PDM at this point. So Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, Outlook message files, PowerPoint presentations. You can preview whatever you're looking for. You can get to multiple sheets and different views inside of the right-click menu down here, and you can even print direct from the preview down here. You'll also get something called a data card inside of here, and I kind of alluded to this earlier where you're storing all that metadata property information, right? These cards are completely customizable. I can store part number, description, heat treat, finish, any custom properties you want get customized onto this card. If they're properties on the SOLIDWORKS files, they automatically write onto the card. If you put them on the card, they automatically write to the SOLIDWORKS properties in your file. So just two-way street. And here's kind of where it divvies between custom properties and configuration specific properties, right? So you see this @ symbol here, that's your custom property, and then your configuration names downstream from there, if you prefer to have configuration specific properties, right? I personally try to avoid them, but it's unavoidable at certain organizations depending on how things are consumed downstream. I mentioned earlier that all data inside of a vault gets version controlled, right? So all these files are at version 1 of 1 the first time I put them in, right? I've also got a bill of materials baked in, and I can see full bill of material capabilities on an assembly inside of here. This can get saved off to Excel spreadsheet, CSV file for consumption downstream as well. And probably one of the biggest topics I get into with customers is the bill of materials with this as built versus a latest concept, right? So is this how we shipped it? Did we change it after we shipped it? What's that bill of materials look like, right? And you can get to both inside of the system relative to the changes that have been made. And you get to any version of an assembly as well relative to the BOM there. The Contains tab is basically similar to the Bill of Materials tab, only it's not as customizable. You will see additional information here, however, with this user-defined references. So the custom reference option over here for user-defined, that'll allow you to attach to EC documents, spec sheets on a particular part, things like that that you can attach to a specific file that aren't necessarily part of the BOM, right, but are nice to get at your fingertips when you're looking for references downstream. Probably one of the most important functionalities is this where used idea, right? So here, when I click on any given part, it tells me the sub and every top level assembly it's ever been used in at your fingertips. It goes the other way with the Contains tab, right? So if I look at the crank sub, it's got the crank arm, the crank knob, the crank shaft. If I look at any of those parts, their where used tell me the reverse of that upstream, right? On every assembly that's ever referenced that part. So when companies think about changing a part, right, and you're worried about breaking references, it's hard to know what you're up against on a network drive, right? So the safest bet is to save as and make a new part number, which could be more expensive, but you might be breaking a bunch of different machines or designs upstream, right? Where in PDM, that where used functionality is going to show you everywhere that that data is used, and now you know what machines you're affecting relative to that decision. Right? Versioning a file is pretty straightforward. If I check out any given file, I open that in SOLIDWORKS, and I've rolled this back to the original version at this point. So this will have the smaller hole in it. You get an add-in inside of SOLIDWORKS that tells you everything about that file in PDM. So I have it checked out. What I have local is equal to what's up on the server, right? If I want to make any changes to this thing, they're a double click away from that. Rebuild on the file. And you'll notice I get a little pencil next to the icon here. That means that I've modified the local file, but I haven't saved yet. When I save that file, that icon changes to a green up arrow with a little clock saying this is now newer than what's in the server. From here, I can simply check this data in, put in a comment, whatever it might be. And then if I'm looking to push that to the next guy in line for a review process or something, you can do a change state right from here as well. And this will move a file through the workflow for submitting for approvals downstream based on whatever workflow that you've built in the backbone. When you close that data back off and back in the local vault view where that data was stored, what you'll find on bracket here is it's now on version 2 of 2, right? So if I go take a look at the preview on that, I now have the longer bracket. One of the really cool things about PDM is I can get back to prior versions as well. So under this Actions tab right here, I can get the prior version of this thing, and it locally caches 1 of 2, and I now have the shorter bracket again. So if you're ever wondering what the difference between drawings, bill of materials are, that's at your fingertips relative to each version downstream. And then to make sure you're always working with the latest data set, you just right click and get latest version, and that'll go and pull down version 2 of 2 again, getting me back to the latest changes, right? And you don't have to do that on a per file basis, right? I can go to the entire vault, I can go to the entire top level folder, and it will query that folder looking for what it needs to pull a reference on if it needs the latest file off of that, right? Can't stress enough, it's important to do a get latest in a PDM environment. One of the benefits of PDM is it's giving you multiple versions of a file. One of the downsides is there's multiple versions of a file, right? So you need to make sure you're working with the latest one when you go to print that and work downstream, right? I strongly like having multiple versions of files. It saved me countless times in my product development where I made a left turn and I was able to go back earlier on in the process and get back to data sets that would have been a redesign. And I don't know about you, but I hate doing the same thing twice. So I think PDM can help a lot with that, but you can certainly manage files outside the vault as well. So.
You have multiple versions of the file. Let's say 3 versions ago was the one that's most like the one I wanted, but I also have some stuff I like from my newest one. How do I open both at the same time?
So there's no great way to open both at the same time. There's also no great way to merge the two of those together, right? And it kind of begs to a concepting type phase relative. The best thing I've found is go get your prior version, copy it outside the vault, maybe rename that with a concept name or something, right? You can pull that back in, do a get latest on the design, and now you've got 2 of them. Pick one of those 2 to move forward with, probably the one that has a history. Make the relative changes, check it back in. But right now, there's no merge these 2 concepts together function. Definitely one of my enhancement requests. But
Where is the local file?
stored? It is on wherever you put the local vault view. So in my case, if you look in here, it's actually on the C drive in a vault called default in this case. Okay.
Is there a way to share and keep updated drawings for people that don't use SOLIDWORKS or PDM?
Sure. You can save anything that you want outside the vault. A lot of companies are doing PDF files. It's pretty typical. Although, with e-drawings, they could be the native drawing file, or you could save as an e-drawings file, right? They want to use the native SOLIDWORKS drawing file. Yeah, you could copy it outside of the vault. The task inside of PDM Pro can save and overwrite data outside of a vault location to overwrite to get the latest. That's what I see most companies doing with PDF files, although you can do it with the native data as well. There's a task that can fire and basically, during the release process, save a PDF off into XYZ location for people manufacturing downstream.
The model, the drawing, PDF, and the DXF.
Gotcha.
And it gets a little tiring after a while.
For sure. Yeah, some tasks inside of PDM could help with that. It would require PDM Pro, but we could fire a task that saves DXF, DWG, etc. So. Any other questions? Thank you much for your time. Yeah.